You know that feeling when a really close work buddy just kind of becomes a ghost? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the mechanics of the fade. We've all seen it happen, right? But what we're really focusing on today is how the core process works under the hood. It's invisible, it's highly structured, and it is absolutely fascinating. Picture this. You've got a colleague who used to, hold court at the team lunch table literally every single day. But over a few months, they just start eating at their desk. Or maybe they stop replying to the group chat entirely, unless they're explicitly tagged. Or think about a relative who used to call you every week, but now it's just text. And then, well, silence. What's actually going on in their head? Now, the very first thing to understand about how this core process works is that there's usually no dramatic exit. Nobody got fired. No tables were flipped in a rage. It's actually a really slow, quiet narrowing. The person is physically still around, but they've just pulled back the little puzzle pieces of themselves they usually share. Like, hanging around after a meeting just to chat, or chiming in with a joke. Psychologists call this whole thing interpersonal avoidance. And the really fascinating part, it's not some fixed personality flaw. And it almost never announces itself. Like, no one sends out a calendar invite saying, "Hey everyone, I'm withdrawing now." Instead, it's a super dynamic process where someone simply, quietly, shrinks their social footprint. So, to really grasp how the core process works, we need to trace its exact life cycle. It's kind of like a four-part journey. First up, the trigger. Then, the fate itself. Next is the way it inevitably gets misinterpreted by everyone else. And finally, the reversal. Let's start right at the beginning, with the engine that actually sets this whole thing in motion. This fade almost always kicks off with one of four main triggers. Maybe they shared an awesome idea and got totally mocked for it, so naturally they avoid the risk next time. Or maybe a specific group has just become way too toxic and draining. Often, though, it's just pure unadulterated burnout. I mean, when you are completely overwhelmed, optional social chats are literally the very first thing on the chopping block. Or, lastly, it could be a quiet realization of a values mismatch. They've just kind of outgrown the room. Let's zoom in on that first trigger for a second, withdrawing after being hurt. It's absolutely crucial to recognize that this isn't weakness at all. It's a learned adjustment. Think of it as a protective measure. It operates the exact same way you'd favor a leg after a bad sprain. You wouldn't call someone weak for limping, right? They're just protecting a vulnerable spot. Same exact thing here. So if you ever spot this fade happening to someone you care about, we've got to stop asking, geez, what's wrong with them? And instead start asking about the timeline. Like what changed and around when? Did they suddenly go quiet right after some public criticism? Or was it a super slow buildup, which kind of points more to pure exhaustion? Trust me, the timeline almost always gives you the truth. But here is exactly where the core process enters a really dangerous feedback loop, especially in the workplace. You see, leaders are literally trained to constantly scan for risk. So when a normally engaged employee suddenly goes quiet, management almost always views it strictly through the lens of output. They completely misread a very real human struggle, like deep burnout or a conflict with a coworker, as disloyalty or laziness, or a glaring sign that they've already got one foot out the door. And hey, it's not just bosses who do this. Society as a whole does this too. Most of our social circles really don't tolerate quiet distance very well. We have this completely unfair habit of equating loud participation with loyalty and quiet distance with arrogance or rejection. And because of that, the person who's withdrawing usually ends up being talked about in whispers rather than actually being talked to. Because we completely misinterpret their silence as a personal rejection, our very first instinct is usually, well, terrible. We try to pull them back in by sheer force of enthusiasm. We send way more invites, we act aggressively cheerful, we demand they come to the mandatory fun happy hour, and spoiler alert, this completely backfires. Why? Because you're dumping high-pressure social demands onto someone at the exact moment they're absolutely desperate for less pressure. Okay, so how do we fix it? To actually reverse this cycle, we have to completely change our mechanics. Step 1, lower the cost of contact. Swap out that huge, loud group dinner invite for just a quick, low-stakes coffee. Step 2, name it, but without demands. And step 3, practice consistency. Showing you're reliably there over time totally beats one grand, overwhelming gesture every single time. So what does naming it without demands actually look like in the real world? Well, try a really simple, low-pressure statement. Something like, "Hey, I've noticed you've been keeping to yourself lately. Absolutely no pressure to talk about it. Just wanted you to know I noticed. This is brilliant because it tells the person they are truly seen, not just missed for what they produce. And it extends a little basic grace without forcing them to immediately explain the whole situation. Now, what if you are the one fading away? Reversing your own core process means taking a hard look and honestly diagnosing your trigger. If you've been hurt, maybe just test the waters with one safe person instead of the whole group. If it's burnout, you've got to address your actual workload, not just clear your social calendar. And if it's a values mismatch, honestly, the best move might be to just let the fade happen and go seek a room that actually fits who you are. Let's shift gears for a second and look at how this fade plays out on a larger institutional level. Whether you're in a standard corporate office or a highly devoted religious community, both environments face this exact same issue. But as you can see here, their early warning systems and how they measure success look vastly different. In a typical corporate world, there's this massive trap. If an employee's worth is only measured by how loudly they speak up in meetings, perfectly engaged but quiet employees are going to get unfairly penalized. The smart organizations, they build multiple pathways to contribute, like written input or async feedback, so people aren't forced to put on this exhaustingly theatrical performance of enthusiasm that they just don't naturally have. But over in religious life, think monasteries or convents, seeing how the core process works is incredibly tricky. Why? Because silence, solitude, and restraint are literally built into the job description. A priest or a nun who is struggling with deep, profound burnout can easily hide in plain sight. They just use the guise of holy discipline to completely mask their own isolation. This means leaders in these communities really have to act like detectives. They have to carefully distinguish between healthy discipline and a painful retreat. For example, a nun maintaining contemplative silence during designated quiet hours, totally healthy. But if she suddenly stops speaking during times when speech is welcomed, or if a priest starts actively dodging his peers during communal meals, well, that's the mechanics of the fade taking over. Because religious life relies so heavily on obedience and devotion, a struggling person will often just stay quiet out of immense guilt. The only real way to short-circuit this process early is by creating an environment of absolute safety. Admitting human difficulty like, sheer exhaustion from ministry has to be met with grace. It cannot be treated as some massive spiritual failure. Okay, if you only take one single thing away from this explainer today, let it be a total reframe of how we view this phenomenon. Withdrawal is a behavior. It is not a permanent personality trait. It's a mechanical process with a clear trigger, a predictable progression, and a very real potential for reversal. And that means it's something we can actually understand and gently fix, rather than just rush to judge. So I want to leave you with this thought. The very next time someone in your life starts quietly stepping back into the shadows, ask yourself, are they really just being antisocial? Or are you simply witnessing the middle of a painful process that just needs a little bit of patience, a much lower cost of contact, and a safe bridge back? Keep your eyes open. Thanks so much for learning with me today.